one thing good about the pandemic, just as when I was going to grad school and 9/11 hit, is that there are opportunities to tell incredible stories.
That was Rachele Kanigal, SF State Journalism Chair and Diversity Style Guide Editor. I'm Jeff, and this is Storied San Francisco. In this episode, Rachele concludes her life story. While working for papers in the East Bay, she got the opportunity to teach a journalism class at SF State. She loved it so much that she decided to get her graduate degree and pursue teaching on a tenure track. She ended up at Columbia University and was in New York when 9/11 happened. After a quick detour at CSU Monterey Bay, Rachele ended up getting her dream job when she became a full-time journalism professor at SF State. We end this podcast with a reflection on what it means to still be here. Here's Rachele.
I just couldn't deal with the commute.
Yeah,
you know.
it's a lot.
And
Would you say they were more different back then? Is that fair to say?
San Francisco and Oakland, or
Yeah, more different than they are now. Because I feel like there's a bit of gentrification that has creeped over here.
Mm-hmm.
Certain pockets, the western part of town, but there's less. I feel like there's a little less difference.
There may be less different. I've lived here for so long. I lived away for a couple of times for a few years, but I've mostly lived in Oakland now for most of the last 35,
almost 30. 35.
Yeah,
Okay.
a long time. So almost 40 years actually. So yeah, I guess Oakland has changed a lot. But I got to like Oakland, and I got to love Oakland, actually. It was, in a lot of ways, a more diverse place. It was...
I think still is.
Yeah, and remains that way. And
yeah. Okay, so now you're...
So now I'm working at the Valley Times.
Not your first job. Your first job was the Progress.
The Progress.
And so now you've moved.
Right. So now
Your
I'm
heart's
living in Oakland.
little broken.
Heart's a little broken. And but I'm working for first the Valley Times and then the Contra Costa Times. And I started covering medicine at the Contra Costa Times. So we had this medical reporter who got fired, and I was doing courts 3 days a week and night cops on Friday and Saturday nights.
Oh my God. Okay.
And classic entry-level job. And so when the medical reporter left, I said, well, are you going to hire a medical reporter? Nah, I don't think we're going to hire anyone. The editor said, if you want, you could do a story every now and then. And so I started writing some health and medical stuff. And then finally they ended up giving me that beat. And it's funny because I was a very squeamish person. I didn't really like, medical stuff, but I loved the stories that came out of the health beat, because there were stories of, people having health problems. I wrote a lot about AIDS. So this was the mid to late 80s. So AIDS was a huge issue, and so I wrote a lot of stories on AIDS, a lot of stories about genetic diseases and new advances in genetic engineering and things like that. And I really fell for the beat. Like, I really got into it,
Okay.
even though it meant that I went to a brain surgery, a knee surgery, heart surgery. Thought that I was going to faint a couple of times.
Like, you look away, just tell me what's
yeah,
happening.
Right. But I ended up covering these things that were very challenging for me. And then I got a job at the News and Observer in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Okay.
So, which was, for me, it was kind of like going to grad school in medical writing, because I was covering Duke and University of North Carolina medical schools. They had 2 major drug companies, And it was the research triangle is I can't remember. It was something like 1 out of 3 or 4 people worked in healthcare. It was
Oh, wow.
it was a real it was a very prominent beat at this newspaper, and it was a very so I had front page stories all the time.
Oh, wow.
And it was a way to really learn about how to cover medicine.
And what city did you live in? Or
Raleigh.
Town? In Raleigh.
Raleigh,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, and how long were you there?
I was there for 3 years.
Okay.
And then I heard that the Tribune was looking for a medical reporter, so I went back to the Oakland Tribune.
Okay.
I worked there as a reporter.
It's like the table was being set for you. Like, come back. Like,
Yeah.
kind of similar to your brother.
Yeah.
Reestablishing ties. Like, come back, Rachele.
Yeah.
Okay, so you came back and did the medical beat for the Oakland Tribune.
Right.
And came back and lived in Oakland
And came back and
again?
lived in Oakland.
Okay.
I had gotten married in North Carolina too. I had met my husband here. He was working at another little newspaper. And so we met. He followed me out to Raleigh, and then we moved back here.
Okay. You mentioned you have at least one son, one child.
Yes.
Do you want to talk anything about starting a family?
Yeah.
I think
So-
one child makes at least a family.
Yes. And I have 2.
Okay.
So I'm going to talk a little bit more about my career because
Yes.
it's going to bridge that.
Okay.
So I was working at the Tribune. We had I had an editor who was teaching part-time at San Francisco State. And so I asked him about that. And the editor, another editor at the newspaper, was good friends with the then chair of the department.
Okay.
So I asked if I could come teach. And
What year would that have been?
so that was the summer of 1995.
95. Okay.
Right. And at that point, my son was about a year and a half old.
And you had been working for roughly 10, 11, 12 years or so?
Yeah, almost 50. Well, I think, about 13, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Graduated from SF State in 1983.
Okay.
So this was now 1995. So yeah, about 12 years.
12 years. Mhm.
So I started teaching a class, a news writing class. And
But you had no experience teaching.
I had no experience teaching,
Okay.
but I was a journalist.
Right.
And they let me teach this class, and I just loved it. It was
Okay.
great. And
Can I
yet-
ask you the thing
yeah.
that I always ask any performative, comedians or musicians or anything like that? Describe the first day of class. I mean,
The first
were
day
you
of class
nervous?
was the first day of class. I was petrified
Yeah.
and excited
Right.
to the point where, and this has not happened to me since.
Okay.
But the first day of class, I don't know what I said, but as I was wrapping up class, they applauded.
Oh, okay.
And everybody came up to me afterwards and said, "I'm so excited to teach this class, to take this class."
Okay.
And like I said, this has not happened to me since.
Right.
So I don't know what kind of magic happened that day, but I just was on fire. I
You
was
stood
so
and delivered.
excited. I was so excited to take this thing that I love doing, journalism, and to teach it to young people. And yeah, I just loved it.
Okay.
So I started teaching one class a semester
While also working
as a
journalist.
reporter.
Okay.
while raising my son. And then somebody left abruptly. One of the faculty members left abruptly, and the chair asked me if I would want to teach full-time for a semester. He took a leave or something. And so I asked my editor at the Tribune if I could take a leave. And my editor said, "You can take a leave, but I don't know if I'm going to have a job for you when you come back."
Right. No guarantee.
No guarantee. And I decided to take the plunge.
To go for it.
And
Okay.
I went for it, and I started teaching as a full-time lecturer
That was 95 or
That was 97. That was January of 97.
Okay. And what subjects or what subject matter what were you teaching? Reporting?
I was teaching news writing, reporting. At some point, I was teaching magazine writing, feature writing, those kind of classes.
And then in 2005, some dude came into your class and started a magazine.
Yes.
I don't want to jump too far, but also
Yeah.
obviously being facetious. But
Yeah.
So now you're full time.
So now I'm full time, but I'm a lecturer, and so the way lecturers are, it's however many classes they need someone to teach.
Right.
So it's a very impermanent, unstable situation.
Not tenure track.
Not tenure track, and I didn't have a master's degree.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided, after I taught for a couple of years, I had my second son, so I have two sons. I decided to go to grad school.
Okay.
And so then I went to Columbia,
Okay.
moved my whole family.
Oh, they all moved
to New York.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess your sons were young.
My sons were,
Or at least one of them
when
was.
we got there, they were 2 and 6. And we get there in August of 2001.
I mean, Columbia.
Yeah,
That's
Columbia.
big deal.
August of 2001.
August of 2001.
I'm
Oh, my
really
goodness.
excited to be in New
Okay.
York. I'm back, walking the streets of New York City.
Mm-hmm.
And then one day I went to school, and there was this sort of gathering spot in the journalism school that had some TVs. I walk into this room, and these TVs are on, and one plane has hit one tower of the World Trade Center, and then I watched the other plane
Live.
on TV hitting the World Trade Center.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the year that I was in New York. So it was an incredible experience as a journalist, as a West Coaster, as a mother of little kids, as the wife of a journalist who was covering it for Time magazine.
Oh,
so
wow.
my husband was writing at that time for Time magazine a lot, and so they sent him out.
Wow.
And so there was a lot going on.
You're like, I just thought I was going to grad school.
Yeah, I just thought I was going to grad school. And yeah.
Well, I don't think we've had anyone on the show who was in New York when that happened.
Mm-hmm.
What was New York like in the months after that? I mean,
there was so much going on. It was so weird because in some ways I was on the Upper West Side, where Columbia is, and a couple of days later, I remember remarking, it was this gorgeous week. It was beautiful September, early fall weather, and I remember walking down the street, and there were all these people sitting in cafes, talking, hanging out, and it was so weird because, a couple miles away, a few miles away down on the other end of the island, there was this incredible devastation.
the world was ending.
The world was ending. So it was very strange. It was all anybody thought about, talked about. I
For
remember,
months.
For months.
Yeah.
Well, for years.
Years.
For decades.
Yeah, here we are.
But yeah, it was a huge story.
Did you ever second guess your decision to go to grad school? Like,
No,
Okay.
no. It was one of the best years of my life. Even though 9/11,
Despite,
my father died that year.
I'm sorry.
But it still was one of the most. I mean, I loved going to grad school. I loved and one thing that was neat was going there. I was in a mid-career program, which I think they don't have anymore, but it was specifically for experienced journalists, folks who had worked, and so we took some classes with the regular students, but we didn't have to take the basic reporting classes and that sort of thing. And what was neat was I was not just taking classes to learn the material in the classes, but I was taking notes on my professors
Mm.
and what worked and what didn't work
Mm-hmm.
and what was engaging and what wasn't engaging.
As an instructor, as a teacher.
Right,
Mm-hmm.
right. And so for me, even though they weren't teaching me how to teach, I was learning how to teach
Mm-hmm.
based on that.
So the idea was always get the degree and then come back and try to get a more
Right, that was the plan.
substantial, permanent?
Well, get
more
a
permanent position.
tenure track permanent job.
Okay, and is that
Yeah.
what happened?
And that's exactly what happened.
Okay. How many? Oh,
But not at SF State.
oh,
So I got a job at the CSU in Monterey Bay.
okay, not bad.
Yeah. And so we moved back to Oakland, and I was commuting to Monterey.
Wow.
So I had a room there, and I would stay there 3 nights a week and then come back. And my husband was basically raising our kids half the week.
Okay.
And I was there for a year and a half. And then I got the job at San Francisco State.
Okay. Yeah, because, again, I don't have a good memory. But if memory serves, I feel like I was already in the program when you came.
Yes.
And I didn't know your story, so I thought maybe you were just brand new.
Yeah, I came back in January 2004.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But when you came back, were you now hired on
Yeah.
tenure,
so I was
tenure track?
Yeah,
Okay.
tenure track. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, this part gets a little bit weird because I'm like kind of implicitly in the story, but what was it like? You're back. It's kind of dream achieved.
Dream achieved. And so I was back in San Francisco, back at San Francisco State, teaching in, I think, the most exciting and also challenging learning environment.
Mm-hmm.
Teaching the students I wanted to be teaching. I mean, I feel like the students at San Francisco State are just much more, I don't know, you can't say that certain people are more interesting than others, but I feel like the students at San Francisco State are incredibly diverse in so many ways, not just race and ethnicity, although that's some of it. I think that they have really interesting lives and really interesting stories, and teaching journalism, I'm teaching students how to look for interesting stories and tell them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And at any time when you were a student, when you're a lecturer, now that you're back, at any time in that, like how important was sort of the legacy of SF State to you? The student strikes,
I think
ethnic studies, all that stuff.
I think that's a huge part of San Francisco State.
Mm-hmm.
The history of activism, radicalism, not accepting the status quo, challenging the world the way it was, trying to make the world a better place, trying to, caring about equity issues, caring about giving opportunities to people who may not normally get them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, all of those things are so much about what it's like to be at San Francisco State,
Mm-hmm.
to be a student there, to be a faculty member there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's
always
huge.
just been important
to
you.
Yeah, it's really.
Okay, which came first, Diversity Style Guide or your position as chair of the department? Diversity
Style Guide.
Can we talk
first.
about that and I guess just from the beginning, where did that come from?
Yeah. So San Francisco State's journalism department had a place called the Center for Integration and Improvement of Journalism.
Mm-hmm.
That was founded about 1991 or so. So
Mm-hmm.
after I was a student, but before I started teaching there.
Right.
And the center was mostly grant funded. We had some money from the university, grant funded or donation funded.
Mm-hmm.
And it was all about diversity in journalism, making journalism a more equitable place and helping people tell stories of diverse communities.
Mm-hmm.
and also helping students, diverse, students from very different backgrounds, succeed in journalism.
In that way,
In that way, yeah.
telling diverse stories, not only, yeah.
Right. So that's been a big part of our department for many years. And we started to lose funding through the digital revolution. There used to be, when it was founded, there was a lot of money for diversity, and that dried up. Newspapers were struggling. Media organizations were rethinking their mission, how they presented news, and so diversity sort of was put on the back burner by a lot of foundations and the places. So we were losing funding, and we decided, and we lost our executive director position. And so we decided that different faculty members would step in for a semester or two and get a course release to do work with the center.
Okay.
So this is probably around, I can't remember the year.
That's okay.
Yeah, that's okay. So I had an opportunity to be the interim director of the center. And I knew that there had been something called the Diversity Style Guide, which was a collection of terms taken from a few style guides. So the NABJ, National Association of Black Journalists Style Guide, the National Center for Disability in Journalism had a style guide, the Native American Journalists Association. So there were a few style guides at that time, and someone had collected all the terms together.
Oh, okay.
And put them on a PDF, typed them up and posted a PDF on a website.
Okay.
And so when I was in this interim director position, I thought, wow, what if we took this style guide, expanded it, and made it a searchable website? So I got a grant from the Sigma Delta Chi Foundation of the Society of Professional Journalists, and to do this project. And I worked with, and I found a whole bunch more style guides. And so I got permission from these organizations and others to put together this diversity style guide on a website. And as I was compiling this, I realized that, well, there's so much more than just should the B in black be capitalized, or should, how do you use a certain word, or what does a certain word mean? That there were deeper issues here. And so I wrote a book proposal for a book that I ended up writing about half of, and then I also got other people, Venice Wagner and Sally Lehrman wrote a chapter on implicit bias, and Christina Azokar wrote a chapter on covering indigenous communities, and so I got a few other people, and then I wrote and researched a lot of the chapters too. So it's really about, it's kind of it's a guide for journalists on how to cover different communities, looking at some of the mistakes that we've made in journalism, looking at some of the changing thinking about language and culture, and how to write about different groups of people. And so then the book came out in 2019.
Okay. Well, and the website was already up.
And the website was up a few years before that, maybe
Got it.
2016, I think.
Okay. And but it wasn't, would you say it was only for journalists or only for students?
Well,
I mean, it's on the World Wide Web, right?
Yeah,
so.
Exactly. It's funny because I thought of it as something for journalists, journalism students, and sort of other media writers. And what's happened, particularly since the killing of George Floyd, is that lots of people are thinking about this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up doing a lot of consulting work with media organizations, and also communications professionals. So I've wrote a style guide for Freddie Mac.
Oh, wow.
I did a workshop for Lockheed Martin.
Mm-hmm.
So
So for businesses.
for businesses, everybody's
corporations.
really. I'm working now with an organization that does educational materials for cosmetologists.
Oh, cool.
And they're asking me, well, how do we write about hair? In fact, I have to look up a term. Here's a term that I'm struggling with right now: mohawk,
Okay.
the hairstyle.
Right.
Yeah.
Also,
So
a people.
right, also people, exactly. So I'm doing some research now on, is the hairstyle mohawk, is that cultural appropriation?
Mm-hmm.
Is it seen as offensive?
Mm-hmm.
Is it, or is there another term for it?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the kind of research that I've been doing for
Yeah.
the Diversity Style Guide.
I mean, silly question, but that work must be very challenging but fulfilling.
Oh, it's so
Ongoing.
challenging, and
There's so many.
and what's interesting is that with each group that I'm working with, the issues are somewhat different.
Mm-hmm.
So with Freddie Mac, for example, I was working a lot on housing and terms related to the problem of homelessness and redlining and the history of oppression and segregation,
gentrification,
all of those,
displacement. Yeah,
all of those kind of terms were coming up.
So, you're the chair of the freaking department now.
Yeah,
That's amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
What happened?
Well, the chair position is a rotating position.
Okay.
So it was.
Has it always been?
It has always been.
Oh,
Some
okay.
people have done it for. So the typical term is 3 years. Some people do it for 2 3-year terms. Some do it for. Some have done it maybe for 3 3-year terms, but mostly we've had people doing it for 3 or 6 years.
Got it.
So I'm
Okay.
at the end of. I'm in the last semester of my 3-year term.
Okay.
And it.
So through COVID.
Through COVID, yeah.
Okay.
So most of the time I've been chair has been through COVID, and it's
Thanks,
been,
universe.
Yeah, it's been a very, very challenging time to be
I don't
chair
mean
of the
to
department.
make light of it. For sure.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about those challenges
Sure,
at all? I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
I don't think most people aren't teachers of any level, but certainly some are. But yeah, let's hear what that's like.
Yeah. So, well, in March we got the word that we were all going to online learning for what we thought would be a couple weeks.
I remember that.
And
so cute in hindsight.
Yes, I know.
Just a couple weeks.
It's hard to remember that, but and so we were trying to figure out, well, how do you teach online? There's this thing called Zoom, which I guess we had used Zoom a little bit before that, but certainly not to the extent we've used it now. How do we teach multimedia skills online? How do we teach photography? And in the early months, we were pretty locked down.
Yeah.
So we were having to decide. We had had this whole ethos in the department of going out in the streets, interviewing people face to face. The idea that email interviews were kind of useless. Phone interviews were better, but really the gold standard of journalism was a face-to-face interview. And we were really trying to inculcate that spirit in our students. And then COVID comes and they're barely allowed to go out of their houses.
Right.
So we were trying to figure out how to help students learn the skills of journalism when they were masked or locked up or whatever. And so, students were having to figure out how to be journalists. And, we have a generation of students in our department now who have hardly been face to face with people.
Right. I'm just thinking challenges all over the place.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah. And plus our students, some of them were getting sick. Their family members were getting sick.
Right.
Some of them lost family members to COVID.
It was touching them.
They lost jobs.
Mm-hmm.
They were trying to figure out how they were going to afford the rent. A lot of them were depressed.
Mm-hmm.
I say were, but I think a lot of them still are depressed.
Yeah. And did you see some attrition, I'm sure?
Yes. We lost a lot of students. So, so we're all trying to figure out what the afterlife is going to be.
Mm-hmm. I mean, for the journalism department at SF State, but also for all of us.
Right.
Can we end on something? So our theme this year on the podcast is We're Still Here. You're obviously still teaching at SF State. San Francisco, I feel like, is still a big part of your life.
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean to you, We're Still Here?
I think what it means for me, the one thing good about the pandemic, just as when I was going to grad school and 9/11 hit, is that there are opportunities to tell incredible stories and to share with readers, viewers, audiences, the nuances of how these events are affecting real people. As challenging as the pandemic has been for us personally, economically, mental health-wise, psychologically, it's also been a time of growth, of finding new connections, of finding new interests, of overcoming grief and loss. And I think that journalism students and journalists are here to tell those stories and to document one of the most cataclysmic things that our country has gone through. This was not just a single event. This was 2 years of lots of things happening.
2 years and counting.
2 years and counting, yes.
It's not over.
2 years so far of, changes in the economy, changes in the society, and the racial reckoning that's happened, I think is not exactly related to the pandemic, but certainly grew out of the pandemic. So yeah, I think we are still here, and we're still here to tell those stories.
That was Rachele Kanigal. On the next episode of Storied San Francisco, meet Jim Argo, a born and raised San Francisco realtor. Episode 36 drops next Tuesday, wherever you listen to podcasts. Music for the podcast was produced, performed, and curated by Otis McDonald. Original photography is by Michelle Kilfeather. Aaron Lim of Bitch Talk Podcast is our contributing producer. And the show is produced and hosted by me, Jeff Hunt. Now in our 4th season, we have more than 180 episodes available on our website, storiedsf.com, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you can, please rate and review the show so we can reach even more folks. We love email, and we'd love to hear from you. Drop us a line at storiedsf@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Stay strong, stay healthy, and we'll see you next time on Storied San Francisco.
This podcast is a proud member of the BFF.FM podcast network. Learn more at podcasts.bff.fm.
BFF.FM, best frequencies forever.